welcome back, and thank you for coming back. And I hope you've warmed up a little bit. I think we've all put our coats on, an extra layer on. I've forgotten how cold it is. So we've got a wonderful afternoon session with Abigail and Alicia. And just to introduce Abigail, Abigail is a PhD researcher as part of the Appears project, which is Appearance Printing European Advanced Research School, which is why we call it Appears. And it's a fantastic project, which is a kind of across Europe. And Abigail and Maureen are PhD researchers, and they kind of represent the much more of the colourful and practice-based, practice-led research as part of this kind of quite dense and scientific programme. So Abigail has a background in physics and art history, and her research very much sort of specialises in the area of optics, spectroscopy, and heritage. And so what she's looking here is the relationship between ancient artworks and contemporary methods of printmaking and half-toning and using colour in order to put coloration back into ancient monuments. So over to you, Abigail. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Some of you met me last week, and you probably had an introduction of the sort of things I'm interested. But today I'm going to talk more on why I ended up in the University of the West of England and how all these matters of color fit in my research and what I am doing now. So we can ask what kind of questions make sense to formulate in the science and in the arts. That's one of the things that brought me into study a PhD in art and design, coming from physics, because I wanted to see the other side. There is sometimes, obviously, a very important aspect of how we sense the world and how the world speaks to us through art, and how we communicate through art. So physics stays in the part of what light does, how energy behaves, things like that, but then it's another part that maybe if we go to the arts, we can find some more answers. You see this artwork, everyone might know it, from Calder. So we can ask, how much does color weight, or what color adds to an artwork? When I see this kind of these pieces, I think too much about my practice in physics, sort of mass balance, how weight affect an artwork, in this kind of depiction here. And then we see the color as well. Probably when you are thinking of making something, you might wonder how the color is going to affect and how and what I'm going to choose, right? It's kind of, it has an effect on the whole idea of the artwork. So how this dialogue can come in today and in history. If we look at the work by Seurat, he brought into the art the new ideas that scientists were having. So Newton and Helmholtz were discussing how our brains create colors that don't exist purely. Sort of, if we combine dots from different colors, we will get the impression of another color, which is, if you do color printing, you will be familiar with halftoning, right? And then even in industrial printing, all the color we see is based, most of it, on this principle. Have you seen these famous artworks? Do you know the artist? It's Cruz Diez. I don't remember, well, his name is Carlos Cruz Diez, of course. This is in Paris. He has works all over the world, and he's Venezuelan. And he was interested in the autonomy of color, how color exists in space and in time. So thinking color not bound to the objects, so as an independent entity. When he thinks of describe his research, he uses concepts that are very kind of explain a lot for physics, from a physics background, sort of addition color, additive color, physichromy, induction chromatic. It's French, but it's very clear if you read it how physical effects are studied. So I was looking at how scientists depict the artistic dimensions of science. For instance, in this work, dissemination group I was in contact with in university, I was looking into what they wrote in 2010. They said, Cruz Diez has worked with varied and interesting approaches to color theory, not only from a sensory perspective, but also from a very well-founded scientific basis. So it's very interesting that there's a separation between what is sensory and what is well-fundamented scientifically, which has changed. That's kind of something that has changed a lot in the recent years, and you will see. It says, using and exploiting a wide variety of optical effects, both objective and subjective, he invites the viewer to a comprehensive experience of visual optics. So from a physical perspective, we would say there is universal effects, which are physical phenomena, which can create environments that are real or imaginary, right? So for physics, it's relevant to say what is real or what is imaginary. So the distinction of what can be measured or what is only in your brain, perhaps. Also, some of the effects that are exploited in this kind of optic art could be the capacity of the eye to create illusion that are only in our brains, right? So kind of questioning what is real and what is imaginary is one of the things this kind of works deal with. So the duality real imaginary, or the also dichotomy phenomena versus illusion. But another field of science now is phenomenology, which deals with consciousness when it's focused towards something, when an experience is occurring. So we cannot, we are embodied entities, we have bodies, and we cannot really think the world without thinking how or what bodies are filtering it. So when we think about phenomenology, we need to think about experience. So there's a world outside, there is also a cognitive system and our senses, and together create the experience. And that's what we can say very much as human beings. So on the other side, thinking on artists writing about color, David Batchelor published recently, not recently, like maybe 10 years ago, this collection of texts by artists discussing colors around the last 150 years. He says, I'm not going to talk about harmony of color because that has been studied a lot. So he focuses on more the speculation and reflection of the things that are not solved, but that are more kind of interesting for contemporary art. So he separates. I'm not going to go through all the book, but some of the things I find very interesting is the discussion of color as a concept and the color as a perceptual experience. So people who deal with colors, makers, will have this condition of the problems they find when they are trying to achieve a color. And there is the other who just kind of make a theory about color and maybe the value of color, etc. He observes that most of the writers think of color in grayscale. So even though they think they're discussing color in space, it's probably because it's easier to find, to discuss, or to abstract a grayscale than if you combine all the colors, try to make a sense of them, it's going to be more difficult to make some order of it. Then one thing is colors, and the other is color. So colors, when we think of colors as multiplicity, we might start thinking about metaphor and association, right? Like what colors, specific colors produce in us, or the emotional response we have to them. And color as a sensation. What is not color, what is color, how it might relate to other senses. Then going closer to my interest is we have color and form, one of the matters that are discussed by several authors. When thinking about color and form, we find color is unreliable, so it depends on the environment, right? We live in a 3D world, and then the things have many faces, and then the angle I move it, we're going to change how we see it. Also, the light around is going to affect it. Where is light coming from? The randomness. If I wear this, I choose this outfit, and then I go outside, and it's like it doesn't combine anymore, right? So it can happen. We are arbitrary. And the autonomy, which goes back to how, even though color is always carried by objects or by matter. No? For physics, we would say there's the need to have matter for color to exist. Considering, well, cannot go into this discussion too much, but we can think obviously in light, right? But we have the relationship to matter and color. But sometimes color exceeds the objects. It seems not to belong to them, as we saw in what this Cruz-Diez is trying to show. So in this idea of color and form, now we will think of 3D printing, right? We have the capability to create endless unimaginable forms by 3D printers, and then also adds different textures and create appearances, create many synthetic objects. So it becomes very relevant, all this applied thinking of color and form, and how we create with a machine an object that looks realistic in a 3D world. As Karina mentioned, this is the project I am involved, and people in Fraunhofer, for instance, are looking into prosthetic eyes or printing skin. It's very challenging, but also very promising for many applications in medicine. So this author says that unlike form and shape, the visual experience of color cannot be verified by other senses. So it's we kind of want have the need to prove, right? Like I wish I could touch color, but no. That shows that it's not. It kind of expresses another property, right? It's not like the tangible thing or if we touch something, we have some mechanical feedback telling us the shape by touching it. But if we just see something, we kind of don't are a bit confused about what we see, and then for human beings has been very difficult to accept. But they produce a lot of new discoveries, of course, and fun. Then just the last thing, we cannot touch color even though it constantly surrounds us, and in some ways we are touched by it, which is a lot of our emotional response to color. But actually, when we are aware of the influence that textures and shape have in color, we can see that we actually touch color. because we touch surfaces and we learn what is the texture, and then we go in reverse. If we see something, we might guess how it's going to feel to touch it, right? Because we have experienced it before. So even for science, sometimes we're in a very strict idea, we say sound, vision, and touch are separate. No, actually, because of embodiment, we experience by all our senses, right? Which also we can think, for instance, in the concept of synesthesia or mixed sensations, when our senses get mixed, and then by listening something, you can imagine a color. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then there's this very interesting book written in 1901 by Emily Noyes Vanderpoel, a painter. It was very, for me, very revealing and kind of condense a lot of this idea. The book starts with this: the relationship of color to light is much the same as that of music to sound, right? It's obviously not strict, but it's a good analogy. We can think of light as waves, we can think of sound as waves, but it is also, we have the sensation of harmony in music and the harmony in colors. It's not possible to track one-to-one, like how like kind of adapt both systems, but for some reason we have, can apply similar concepts. You can play around with, I found this website, colorproblems.art, and I put some image, and it gives you a color analysis, which is which colors appear in your composition. Actually, there is no, I was looking into how this is constructed. She didn't say, but she was not really interested in kind of maybe in explaining that much, but she was explaining, she was trying to find the weight of color in the emotional response, kind of by separating the colors and this proportion that exists. I'm just gonna go through I was gonna jump to something else, but I'm gonna start to talk about maybe the importance of the use of RGB color, right? We are familiar to absorption color, which is like the model cyan, magenta, and yellow, where if we combine these three colors, we're gonna get black. But on the other hand, if we combine RGB colors from light sources like LEDs or any source like computer pixels, like an LED, we will find a emissive color, which is like the nature of the light, say, and by having these three colors, we will create the impression of white. So our brain is capable to construct color based on these two models. And so until some years ago, it wasn't possible to print in RGB color, but now we are using some pigments that can not absorb the color, but just reflect it and create some effects like the ones in nature. This kind of color is called structural color, and is produced by the structure of layers in a material. For instance, in bear feathers, the layers of keratin and melanin are flat, like in the image of that side. So a phenomenon of interference occurs. So light is reflected according to the wavelength, and it kind of intercedes again on the way back, and then some colors are gonna be intensified in a particular angle. And that's what we perceive as iridescence. So structural color is often iridescent. This is a quetzal feather, which has, in these feathers has very intense effect of iridescent. And that's why if we were hematologist or know my research a little bit, you might know that this work was used in the production of artworks by ancient cultures of the Americas. And it was, then I was interested, I have been interested in why these feathers are important, in the sense of why the color, what the colors communicate, or what is the symbolism of color. Then, because of feathers were used as a way to mimic reality, to create appearances, pigments were not used so much as a way, in the way the Western cultures did before they met. Because in Europe, pigments were used to paint, kind of a figurative painting, whereas for American cultures, feathers were more common to use for creative purposes, for kind of creating similarities in the world. And this is because probably because painting and writing were not separated. So when people use pigments, like coming from plants or minerals, they would relate that more to writing, to glyph writing or hieroglyph writing. Whereas for feathers, there are descriptions where they tell how exactly to place feathers, so they intensify some relations. Or also they would say, you need to put a layer of white, you need to put a layer of blue, and what kind of earth is going to produce a certain effect. So there was a whole theory of the use of feathers. So using RGB inks, which are white if you see them in powder, but take color when you place them in layers. Then I have been experimenting with making a headdress from a collection in the Ethnological Museum of Vienna, where I am mostly interested in the phenomenon of iridescence. So these inks allowed to produce the effect of being changing depending on the angle, which was the property that gave ancient artworks the kind of realism that people looked for. And this is because when the verde is moving, is when you see that the color is changing. So there's a strong relationship between changing color and movement, which has to do with the fact of things being alive. So the headdress itself is a symbol of giving life. And it has to do with a kind of deity I talked to you last week, which was called Quetzalcoatl. And it's because this character is a life giver and is a maker. So by adding this responsiveness to life, we are talking about the liveliness of things, which also we see even in the water. When water is moving, we see water kind of reflecting life in different ways, and life also is an expression of vitality. Another work I'm developing now has to do with polychromy in artworks. I mean, in ancient buildings of the Mayan area. And this is, it kind of collides with heritage because a lot of these monuments have been destroyed now. So there is the potential of using these new printing methods to recreate the appearance and to bring them to life again, and that could be relevant for museum collections. An option is to make them with a digital method, like 2.5D printing, which is based on placing layers of inkjet until we construct a height, certain degree of height, and then also applying colors according to a photograph, which also creates some challenges because the relationship of form and color, when the form changes, when the texture increases, we will change the roughness of the materials, and that's gonna increase the matticity or the glossiness of the surface. So kind of a play of, when you change one thing, you will affect the other. This is an example of this is some watercolors painted by Adela Breton, a British artist who traveled to Mexico in early 20th century and made some watercolors of this monument. This is a black and white photograph, and these are watercolors. So I like this idea again that color being separate from form, and then now we can explore how to bring them together and how that also has it's very has its own autonomy. The print can result in many ways, as you know. So I have been experimented with photomechanical methods. This is well, this is me sensing the color of the watercolors by a colorimeter. And then I have used photopolymer plates to create the color, and then a laser cutter to create an embossing plate, and then put them together. So result in a print with a relief. And this is, I really like this method because it's one of the things that you cannot really imagine before it's made. But at the same time, when it's made, it creates an impression of reality. So this relief has been even in my dreams. Sometimes when I kind of sleepy, I try to think how it was to be there. Maybe because if I have this imagination of being there, I can go closer to original, because there's no way for you to be there anymore. So I really think printing has helped me to imagine how it was to be there. This is a digital variation, which I don't know what you think, but this looks more plastic because it's kind of the properties of the materials, right? It's the same, but just with a different material. And just as you see in this image, the micro texture is changing. So this is more rough, and this is more sharp, and there is visibly a change, right? So the things that are very relevant for printing. So again, relationship, color, and form. And that's it for me. I hope your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. It's fascinating. Any questions for Abigail?
So it's more a kind of comment about RGB and CMYK. So this is basically industrial standard. It comes from how you record, and that has a history as well. But if you could record differently, of course you can print then in red, green, and in blue as well. You only need to record differently. So it has to go hand in hand.
Yeah, but I know it's like a kind of convention. Yes. But if you print RGB in absorption pigments, you will get black.
Yeah, of course.
So you cannot have to say additive color or...
you know,
So
it comes
color.
from how you, when Maxwell did his first experiment, he projected and he used red, green, and blue because he recorded like that, and he got white by the combination. So, you know, that's the paper we have just published.
Yeah,
But because we print the shadows, and when we record in RGB, we have to print the shadows. So we use cyan, yellow, and magenta, and then plug to correct. But if we record in cyan, yellow, and magenta, we can, of course, print in RGB. We need then to get plug because we can print the shadows. Mm-hmm. With the work you touched on, the Merck spectral pigments, they reflect light, so they work almost like light sources. So there we are printing the light. So it's like a display. Mm-hmm. So, but it's really a convention. You can have completely different colors as long as you match recording and printing, and as long as you decide what you want to print. Shadows are light. Mm-hmm. But it's basically it's an industrial convention.
Yeah, totally, definitely, yes.
Thank you, Abigail. I was just curious, maybe you explained it, but I missed it. Why do you print on black paper the image of the feather headdress? I was curious about that.
I am printing highlights. Mm-hmm. So for printing this in RGB, you have to invert the image because it works as an inverse process. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you have the black, which is absorbing everything, and you have only what you want to be reflected, which is the color of the pigment itself. So again, it's like a light source. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is super technical, but I think this is fantastic. How is the map for the depth of the print being built up? What data do you need to do that? Have you got a 3D scan? And is the color?
Actually, it's a design. So I have made it by just tracing and deciding which is back, which is low, and which is high. Okay. Yeah, which is I guess you are familiar with grayscale height maps.
Yeah, so it's a grayscale height mask.
Yeah, but because there is no access to the original place,
right,
it has to be guessed. And also there is pictures, but there's no effective way to get a 3D model from a photo yet. So
but
maybe now with AI.
You could do a low relief 3D scan and then use that data to actually show all the different depths of the object from top to bottom.
Actually, something I really like is now I have made the prints and I have scanned them. So I'm going to get better resolution and more detail than the original height map that I had because the design has transformed into something real. So with the kind of infinite detail, if you want. So yeah, I have taken 3D scans, but from the prints rather than from the original.
It's a beautiful extra aspect to the printmaking. Brilliant.
Thank you. I was at the Met a couple of weeks ago in New York, and there was this really fantastic exhibition around polychromy in Greek statuary and architecture, and the colours that you've selected here are really similar to the Greek paintings. So I will share them with you because they've got a list of all the different colours. Obviously, the colours that they used were the colours which were local. Mm-hmm. So the sort of you've got the Egyptian blue, yellow, orpiment, deep red hematite, cinnabar, malachite, azurite. So yeah, I think that's really fascinating actually in terms of that recoloration of classical statuary, which we kind of through our own historical teaching can just naturally assume are white or stone coloured, but so much of it was coloured and beautifully coloured as well, quite bonkersly so. And it kind of really changes our perception about what these amazing monuments looked like in the past and how they're kind of presented to us. And your kind of that sort of perception of movement as well, I think is really, is really significant.
Yeah. I was, yeah, I have encountered the same, like the palettes are quite similar, but especially I would say the reds, because of obviously the iron that is so available in the floor, that a lot of the ancient architecture was painted in red. And another thing I find relevant to mention is that it has taken an artist to identify other artists, because when Adela Breton went to Mexico, she was very concerned because no one was really recording color in a very precise way, and she noticed the value of the artwork itself through his color, because she considered that the painters would think of color in space. So it was, the artworks were specifically made for the specific place and to be seen at the specific hours in the day. So because she was a painter, she was able to notice them. Maybe for others, it was not so obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that her recording of the colours, and then her taking it back to Bath as well, and that sort of understanding of how colours appear under different lighting as well.
Yes. Yes, when it happens to me with the print, it's very engaging for myself, because I would see it in a normal light, just like when I'm printing it, and then I take it to the window and the sunset, and it's very dramatic, the effect it has. So it's completely transformed into something else, it becomes alive. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Abigail? No? Okay, thank you. Everyone, thank you very much.